Welcome to the Actionable Futurist podcast, a show all about the near-term future with practical and actionable advice from a range of global experts to help you stay ahead of the curve. Every episode answers the question, what's the future of? With voices and opinions that need to be heard. Your host is international keynote speaker and actionable futurist Andrew Gribble.
Today, we welcome back a previous guest on the show, Dr. Lynn Gribble, Associate Professor at University of New South Wales in Sydney. Lynn joined UNSW after a long corporate career in learning and development, as well as human resources, holding master's qualifications in both education, with a focus on aligning personal and organisational values, and labour law relations. Lynn's PhD looked at the effects of retrenchment on humans. Now, Lynn's been on the podcast twice, back in Season 1 to talk about the future of people management, and in Season 2, spoke about thriving in uncertainty during the height of the pandemic. She's back for Season 5 to talk about the impact of generative AI tools, such as AI in education, something I know Lynn and her peers have been debating since ChatGPT was launched in 2022. Welcome back, Lynn.
Thanks, Andrew. So lovely to be here.
Full disclaimer, we've known each other for the best part of probably 25 years when we both worked together at Optus and have stayed firm friends ever since. I love having you on the show because, one, you're very actionable and pragmatic and practical, but two, you know what you're talking about. You've been doing this for a while. This hot topic, we've been burning to talk about this, and it is absolutely in the news. I can't go a day without reading about ChatGPT somewhere. Generative AI and education. Perhaps you could start by providing your personal and academic views on this very thorny subject.
I am so excited to see AI being talked about in the education space. Anybody who says we didn't see this coming perhaps wasn't scanning the horizon. And Andrew, one of the reasons you and I like talking is because we're always scanning for what's next, what's new, what's coming. It should be no surprise. We've had so many things in the world that have brought about change. Think about the introduction of calculators. And I always remember perhaps, and some of your listeners will know when people used to say, oh, you can't guarantee you'll have a calculator in your pocket. But today everybody carries one in their pocket when they carry their phone. My personal view is that it's very exciting that we've got a tool now that means that no matter what your level of literacy, your capability to write, or your ability to read, you can produce or reproduce knowledge in a coherent way. For many people, this will mean that they can talk to customers in a way that's more likely to build their business. They will save a lot of time from having to look things up. So think about how frequently in a day you might go, let me just Google that, and you'll get an answer. And then you'll say, oh, I've done a little bit of homework on that and I know this about it or I know that about it. The difference with ChatGPT or any AI tool that you're using is that it's able to string together in a way that creates a coherent sentence or a coherent paragraph, some knowledge that you can read. The real thing that comes after that is what do you do with it? So for education, I think it's very pivotal because we now have to think about moving beyond knowledge dumping, which most of my colleagues have moved beyond. I'd like to think all of my colleagues, but let's face it, there will always be a knowledge imparting part of education. The real challenge for education now is to say, what do we do with that knowledge? And I'm part of the UNSW Business AI or Artificial Intelligence Lab. And in that lab, we're looking at, don't worry just so much about the tech, but worry about what business is going to do with that. How does this impact how we do business? How do we come into business? How does it make business easier?
So one of the biggest things that's being reported at the moment is this is going to turn education on its head because plagiarism has been a problem for a while. There's even an Australian company I read about that will actually scan what you've written to see if it's been written by a chatbot, but I'm sure there's another AI that will obfuscate that. What's been the general view of educators that is this a pivotal moment that now plagiarism will just be impossible to tame and we're just going to have people using ChatGPT all the time?
I think it's really important to differentiate what plagiarism is over integrity and ethics. And a full disclosure, I'm a person who teaches ethics. I work with our integrity unit at the university as well. So plagiarism is where I take somebody else's words and pass it off as my own. And that's 100%, Andrew, you wrote something, I go into the world, I put it out as my own, and I don't ever identify that I learnt that, was exposed to that through your knowledge, or that I might have had read something that you wrote. The integrity piece is about actually saying, so I was having this conversation with my colleague, Andrew from the Actionable Futurist, or I looked this up on ChatGPT, because at the end of the day, people have been doing this on Google, they've been doing it in books. And the difference is that we've got to move beyond testing writing. So when I say that, one of the areas I look into a lot is assessment. And I often say that, when we're giving feedback on assessment, after you've said you've got a problem with grammar, stop worrying about it. Drill down to the knowledge, drill down to the application, drill down to, is the discipline knowledge or the discourse about that knowledge right? The ability to write is its own skill set. And I think we've got to separate those two issues for a moment. I understand everybody's talking about plagiarism, but I wonder if we should talk about integrity and ethics. And I like to use this analogy, which I learned very early on, which is that if I have a pen, I can use that pen to write beautiful poetry, or I can harm you by poking your eyes. The pen is not the problem, the use is the problem. So I don't know that ChatGPT per se is a problem. We need to make sure that how it's being used is being used in a way that is appropriate to where you're going to ultimately work. Doctors these days will look things up on Google because they're a general practitioner. They're not a specialist. So they'll say, oh, just a minute, I'll look that up. We've all had an experience where we've seen a doctor do that. So I think that we need to come back to this, worry less about if it's plagiarism, but instead go back to what are we assessing? What knowledge do we want people to have? And what's the most important thing is, how can you use and apply that knowledge? Can you bring multidisciplinary thought to that knowledge? Can you innovate? And you sent me some questions that we might talk about before, and you said, this is what ChatGPT says I should ask you. Here is what I as a human want to ask you. And once we put that human layer back over everything, then we change it. So people are very worried about what a robot can do. Instead, go, what can I as a human do with what this robot is producing so that I can go to the next level? When IBM created Watson, for example, and they said, oh, Watson can win Jeopardy. Hurrah! But what Watson can't do is do anything novel. We've already proven that ChatGPT can largely pass a medical exam, can largely pass most of the things that we've put out in the world. But what we do know is when we actually make that, apply it to this, it doesn't work so well. If we actually start to apply what I always talk about as academic judgment or knowledge-based judgment, if I produce something for you on ChatGPT, you would go, Lynn, this is a bit thin. If I gave you something in my area and said, produce this, I'd come back and say, Andrew, that's very thin or superficial. So what we've got to do is actually start to move beyond that, seeing thin and superficial as enough. And that will differentiate people in the workplace, for jobs, etc. So we've got to become different at how we interview, how we recruit, how we're educating. And just like the calculator, start to incorporate it into how we do what we do rather than as in addition to what we do.
I see ChatGPT as a good first draft. So, yeah, let's assemble some knowledge. Let's put it together as a straw man, and then let's actually apply our own knowledge. And just to back to another point you made, and the calculator, let's look at the calculator of the 2000s. When I write something anywhere on my laptop, I actually have a thing called Grammarly running in the background, and it it always suggests a better way to write a sentence, picks up where I've made grammatical punctuation errors, and I'm okay with that. And what I turn into someone looks okay because I've had some AI work on in the background. So I'm actually okay with that because what I turn out looks a lot better, and I often run things through it. In fact, if you have a Grammarly subscription, and hello Grammarly, I've been using you for years, it'll actually do it in real time. And even putting together the questions for today, it made some suggestions about grammar and punctuation as well. So I'm okay with that. But I think you're right that it can be used for a great first draft, but then you actually have to apply your knowledge on top of that. So ethically, Would I say the first draft or the research I got was from ChatGPT? I don't know. But just back to the question. So what I did, almost like being in the Matrix, I asked ChatGPT to ask you some questions on this subject. My chat prompt was, I'm going to interview a leading Australian academic for a podcast about the impact of ChatGPT on education, plagiarism, and what educators should be doing now to prepare for generative AI. Develop intelligent questions to ask her on the podcast. And in real time, it came back with a whole lot of questions. So let me ask you the first couple, which I probably would have asked anyway. How do you see the use of generative AI models evolving in the education sector in the next few years? That's, I think, a really valid question, because once we all know how to use this tool, like using the calculator in Grammarly and Excel, what's next? Will we see a high quality of application of theory because we've been able to hone it the first draft with some AI?
We may see that, but I think what we're going to see is a difference in how people get their base knowledge. For years at universities, we've been saying you can't cite Wikipedia. And let's be honest, a lot of people will get that starting prompt from Googling or Wikipedia. What we're going to now see is, instead of, and I'm a great believer in that prohibition doesn't work, entry-level subjects are about learning to use these generative technologies in relation to your discipline or field. And then the latter years of your degree, let's talk about a bachelor's degree, years 2, 3, 4, or a master's degree after the first 6 months, are going to be about how do you take that to the next level of thinking? How do you innovate with this? How do you change how you're working with this? I think the real change is to think about it from a business perspective. And I'm a business academic, so I have to focus from that area. If I was your manager today and I said, Andrew, can you go away and do this? I would assume that it's going to take you about an hour to learn what sort of good questions you can ask and get that base information. So instead of you taking 3 weeks to do something or 2 weeks to do something, my calculation in my mind is, well, in an hour, you should be able to ask some good questions and gain some good knowledge. And I'm hoping that you've read that and thought about that, and then you might go for lunch or might have a bit of a brainstorm or a think tank session. And really by tomorrow afternoon, sort of within the sort of 48-hour window, you should be able to come back to me with a fully formed idea with your critical thinking, your innovation, your multidisciplinary view. So we're going to see business speed up how it's working. I think that one of the challenges that I had a discussion about this morning is, what does it mean for entry-level jobs? And I think that one of the things that we may see is that becoming the person who is very good at asking the prompt questions and chewing out this base level data becomes the entry-level job. And then it's the people who are able to do things with that at a higher level that will rise the ranks. The really important question here is to be able to look and say, does that align with my knowledge? Is it different from my knowledge? Do I think they've got it right or got it wrong? And while I hate to give conspiracy theorists any air at all, we know how quickly somebody can spread a mistruth. So the real thing here is to understand there are multiple truths, but to understand enough about your area to go, that's not quite right. So when I first played with ChatGPT, I asked it to write my assignment. Now, it took me about 2 questions to get the sense of how I needed to ask it. But once I went, this is what I need to ask it, I was able to produce my first assignment in less than a minute. So it's pretty exciting. And then I went, this would get a pass. So if I wanted to take this to being a high distinction, probably about 30 minutes worth of editing. And I want to come back to your comment about Grammarly and various tools like that. So for many years, people have employed editors, copywriters, proofreaders. So this isn't anything different. It's just that a machine is doing it. And we need to get comfortable with that. We need to also look at it and say, okay, what do I want the human to do? And go back again to that first year. So first year, if I'm going to learn coding, I need to understand the fundamentals of coding. After that, ChatGPT can create it for me. I can get into a community group of Discord. They will be able to help me to do it. It's the same in my field. If I'm trying to work something out, I'm not sitting in my office with my door closed, or I would hope that nobody is. I'm really hoping that people are community building, gathering, having the discussions. And for me, I've had this fabulous time since this hit the greater space, talking to people everywhere saying, what are you doing? Let me unpack that. Don't you think the problem is this? And having those really good conversations about what we do. That's the future here.
Just pick up on a point there about those entry-level jobs. I'm thinking in my mind exactly the same thing, that part of the joy of getting the right answer out of a generative AI system is putting the right prompts in. When the AI art came along, I've had lots of people play with that, and some of the art that's been generated is even more fantastic than the prose I've seen. But the challenge is getting those prompts right. If I'm an illustrator, I'm probably thinking my job could be over because generative AI can actually do better pictures than I can much faster. But you've really got to tame it to say, I want a picture of this and I want this element and those sort of things. So I think you're right. Getting those prompts right will be the main thing, but also knowing what the prompts are. I think if we look at what ChatGPT has done at the moment, and they're up at GPT 3.5, they've said that version 4 will be out soon. But what they've trained it in is just publicly available data. And a bit about your ethics there, we don't know what data it's been trained on. Were there conspiracy theories that it read? And so it's actually learning those sort of things. When we go into the business sense, I'm just thinking back to our old employer, Optus. If you had a customer on the phone and in real time, you're trying to work out what's the lifetime value of them, what products do they have, imagine if you could actually have, when the call comes in, that generative AI could actually build some prompts for you to say to the customer to recommend a new product and those sort of things. But that would mean training the data on that product set or that customer set. So if you're an educator working in ethics, you'd want to make sure that it's loaded all the great ethics writing and those sort of things. So I think we're going to start to see, as OpenAI, that are now 49% owned by Microsoft, huge investment of $10 billion from them, they are going to say, okay, what are the business uses here? And it might be there are versions where you can train it just on UNSW data or on all of your theses and those sort of things. I'm fascinated that educators have probably been the most vocal about this, because probably when you step back, biggest threats at the moment, because kids can this term turn in a paper that might be aided by generative AI. But what other discussions are you having? And with your business hat on, where do you see other industries really leveraging this? And what should they be doing now to prepare for the new world of generative AI?
A lot of the discussions I'm having are about, if you are, and I'm an education-focused academic, so that's important to note, if you are going into your classroom and your main thing you're doing is giving knowledge and then testing knowledge, however, and I use testing in the loose sense, so assessing for knowledge, that's very level 1 stuff. It's not higher order. So it's, don't go into your classroom this term asking somebody, can you tell me, for example, what is Kantian ethics or what is care ethics? And I'm hoping that nobody was doing that. I certainly wasn't doing that, because, by the way, you can just Google that, but ChatGPT will write you a very nice formed answer. The critical thing there is, what could you do if you looked at this problem through a care ethics lens or a Kantian ethics lens? Then if we move beyond that to business, I think that it's time, if every HR, every learning and development professional, and every senior manager should be stopping right now and saying, in the next 12 months, what jobs do we need? And start rewriting job descriptions and start making sure that people have got an opportunity to retrain. Nobody can afford to sit and say, just tell me. And I had a great conversation this morning, Andrew, which took me back to our very early days when I met you and I wasn't very technically focused. And I would say, Andrew, help me understand my phone. And you would do great things and explain it to me. And I'd say, great. And I was saying that it was because I had a willingness to learn that I could then start to see what was possible. And I was one of the very first people to pair my phone with a very old piece of technology called Palm Pilot, so that I could actually do what an iPhone does now, way before that was possible. So if I was today the CEO of a company, I would be looking at every single job. I would have everybody deployed on, look at the job, what part of that job could be done by a piece of generative AI, if not in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months, in the next 2 years. Start to recruit those people who want to be lifelong learners, who want to be at the edge of doing something new and innovative. Ask yourself the question, if you're a person who's saying, look, I just want to do what I do and I don't want to do anything else, actually let them keep doing the legacy part of the business. You don't have to say there isn't a place for you. There will be legacy parts of the business. And this is the transition phase over the next, I would think, 2 to 5 years while business catches up while we're doing this. I'd like to think they might do it faster, but we all know that there are many businesses that even during COVID were struggling with, well, we still need a real signature. I mean, I did something the other day with an insurance company. Oh, no, we need you to sign it this way. And I said, but you have a digitally encrypted signature that is verified to be mine. And in the end, I said, you actually have to accept it. And they did. But I had to teach them. And I was like, really? So I think the real shift here is for all academics, all education this term, you might need to, or in this coming term, you might need to say we're going to have a prohibition stance, but recognize that that won't work. And in the background, be redesigning assignments, be redesigning assessments, be assuming that people will use this just like they might use Grammarly, right? Or the grammar tools on your word processor or any of those things. As you said, it's no different. They're going to rote learn this stuff and go into exams and chew out rote learned papers. HSC students, A-level students have been doing that for years, so let's not get too excited about that. It's just that they didn't create the original knowledge. So again, come back to what is it you're really measuring. And for business, get out there now, look at those jobs. And I'm with you, Andrew. Know that customer, know how you can better communicate with them. I got a piece of AI yesterday. I'm pretty excited that it will actually draft most of the responses in my emails. Things like if somebody says, would you like a coffee? It will instantly say, I'm not available on these days because I teach and, blah, blah, blah. How about this? Which is what I would naturally say anyway. So it will produce those for me and I can just go send, 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 send. And I can tell it to do it politely. And if it can take some of the grunt work out of producing, as you said, the baseline stuff, the start of a marking rubric, the start of an assignment question, and then I put my humanness over that, I've just saved hours. And that's more productive, better for everybody.
Back when I did my MBA, we were taught that in the future, we'd be marketing to a segment of one and we'd have one-to-one marketing. The fact that you can actually type a prompt into ChatGPT or Midjourney and get something back in literally seconds means that probably in real time, when a marketing message goes out, like on an email or something on a website, you might see a dynamically generated picture, prose, whatever, that absolutely talks to you. That's probably the future as well. But let me just change tack slightly. There are lots and lots and lots of column inches being written about generative AI at the moment, and journalists love to write about the scary fact that we're all going to lose our jobs. But I love the human element. So Nick Cave, I'm not sure if you saw this, one of Nick Cave's fans, in fact, many of his fans, have written songs in the style of Nick Cave, and they sent them to him. And he responded a couple of days ago on his blog saying that the song that was produced was rubbish and that he suffers for his art. And he said, data doesn't suffer. AI can't feel emotion. That's a creative person, a songwriter who is quite upset. In fact, one of the lines in the AI-generated song spoke to him. It said that this is awful or something like that. Just moving away from education, in the creative industries, I know you dabble there as well. What's the feeling around that? Are people worried that their jobs are going to go away, or are the smart ones saying, hallelujah, all this time saving, I can actually do things even faster?
I think that there will always be people who fear change. And as you know, Andrew, I started in a background of change management and wanted to understand how we could align so that people were less fearful of change. But, we all have routines and we're used to doing that. I think that when we look at the creative industries, and my own daughter is an emerging artist, what she produces as a printmaker is not going to be produced by AI. But to say that there's no space for digital or AI would be foolhardy, because of course, we couldn't be having this conversation halfway around the world if we weren't digitally enabled and digitally enhanced. So I again come back to that, can a computer write a song with emotion that, a Nick Cave or a Motown artist or whoever you like to listen to can do? Well, we know that there are certain formulaic responses that will get people listening to things or will draw people in to watch it. But at the end of the day, creative industries are always going to thrive on humanness. It's about the marketer who can think about not that it's personalized to the point of one, because, by the way, we've had personalized marketing for years. I mean, right back, you chose a TV or a radio station, the ads that were being played were to the demographic of the people who watched commercial TV and commercial radio. So no problem at all there. Nobody should be worried about that. In fact, they should be gleeful that they're now not getting a garden hose with the baby cot so that you don't feel too creeped out that they know that you might want to buy a baby cot. So I think I love the time-saving factor. I love the fact that it talks to me, and I recognize that it will talk to me. I have to become information literate. And you talk about being digitally curious. I talk about this information literacy, knowing what information I'm passing over, how it's being used, what will happen to it. All of those things are critical. So we actually have to have a different type of learning. And I know that you specifically asked me about creative industries. And so I want to say to anybody who's listening to this, the arts are adaptive. And if we're not actually consuming some sort of art, I know that you did a blog on taking your team once to the art gallery for an afternoon to get them thinking differently. Whether it's going to the theatre, whether it's seeing a concert, whether it's going to an art gallery. In Sydney at the moment, Festival of Sydney means we have a plethora of art to see. And I find that when I see that, what it does is it ignites my senses in a different way. And all of a sudden, a problem that I might have been thinking about at work that I've escaped for a half an hour or a day on a day off, I go back and I look at that problem in a different way. I look at that situation in a different way because the arts actually have that ability on our brain. AI is not going to go and do that for us.
So another educated-related question. I'm sure there are not classes in how to use Google, but just as an aside, back when I was at Telstra in around 2000, I became a human Google because friends would call me literally and say, can you find this for me on Google? Now, I know about the minus sign and putting things in quotes and all those sort of things. I know about the prompts to get the best out of Google. I'm sure UNSW doesn't have a class for how to Google because people assume the basics there. But will we have to have every class to start to educate people on how to use other tools? So I'm wondering, probably if this came into being around November last year, all the lesson plans haven't changed. But if I went to a Dr. Lynn Gribble class in the next year, would you have a section on, first of all, how to use these tools? And secondly, what the expectation is in learning? So will educators have to integrate these tools and overtly say, yes, they exist, here's how to use them, and here's how I expect you're going to use them?
It's a great question. And I think that particularly in universities, my course is not about teaching ChatGPT. My course, particularly this upcoming term, one is about ethics and sustainability and one is about organisations and people in context. For those, absolutely, I can tell you that every one of my students will be told, we know these tools exist. We know that you're likely to use it. If it writes your whole paper, and that would be considered to lack integrity, and that will go to the integrity office. So we'll be very clear on that. And we will tell people that we'll be running a number of tools and having what we always call educative conversations and courageous conversations about what did you do? How did you produce this? I talk to my students all the time about how did they go about producing it. I don't know that there's a space in my course to teach how to write good prompts, and nor is it the outcome of the course. So it would be disingenuous to my students to spend a class teaching them how to write good prompts because it's not what they signed up for. But it is important to make sure that people understand. Well, first of all, I teach mainly master students at the moment. So I'm assuming that they've all had a play. And if they haven't before, they will within the first few weeks because they'll be on WeChat groups and other groups, Discord groups, and people will say, hey, this is what you do. And people will give them the prompts. And so there's that. I always say as a person who is digitally enhanced in my teaching that I try to use anything that I use should be one click integrated into a platform. So we might see different ways of getting students to do things so that we can actually observe that. But we've had lots of support for students to learn to write, recognizing that writing is a core skill, but it's not my job to teach you to write. So I think that will there be introductory classes sometime in the coming year where every student can go and learn, right, if they want to? I could see that happening. I think that we will see it more happening in a school level. So remember now that the students that are coming into university in 2023, 2024, 2025, they've all been through COVID learning. And because they've all been through COVID learning, they are far more comfortable with learning with video, learning on a screen, using technology, even technology that makes them a little bit uneasy. They will go, well, somebody will help me fix it, right? So we've got a new generation coming in. Not last year, year before was the first generation of the COVID educated student. And over the coming years, we'll see that increase because they did more COVID learning. So 2021, they had 1 year. 2022, they had 2 years. Well, this year they had 2+ years. They've really learnt to do this. So it just is exponential.
Those students you mentioned, some have been through a whole series of COVID or remote learning. How are they differing to your students of the past?
I've been online teaching for about 14+ years. I'm talking about not distance learning. I'm talking about real online teaching with webinars and web-based information and interacting that way. And what I see now is that most students don't struggle to get on a platform anymore or to understand how to submit an assignment, how to access material. So that's definitely different. The other thing is that I would think, and I don't want to put a number on this, but many students, if not most, believe that they are good online learners. And I don't know that that's true because many of them have, in the class and multitasking, watching, TikTok or doing their emails in the background. And then they'll miss something and they'll say, oh, hang on, I missed that. We know that social learning is really important, right? The conversation, the engagement with each other, as well as with the teacher. So I think that we have this gap at the moment in students who say, look, I don't need to come to campus. But trust me, they do. I've just returned to campus where I'm on campus 3-4 days a week. And it's the richness of the conversations. This morning, as I met one person for coffee, I walked down from one end of the campus to the other. I bumped into a colleague of mine, a professor from law, hadn't seen him for a while. We had a little bit of a chat of our view of the future around digital learning, digital innovation. I then walked down the corridor, bumped into the director of our University of New South Wales Business AI Lab. She then came to my office. We had a half an hour chat. She left. I dived on a Teams call to a colleague who was working remotely today. He said, oh, I noticed you've got a new picture in your office. So we had a whole different conversation. I got off that call. Another colleague was walking down the corridor and said, oh, so nice to see you. Came in, sat down, pulled up a chair for a half an hour, and we had a chat about general things. So that social learning, that incidental learning is so important that happens when you're going into the classroom, when you leave the classroom and you give each other that knowing look, and I'm sure we've all done it. That was the worst experience of my life. Let's all head to the inverted commas pub, whether that's the coffee shop, the bar or whatever. It's the conversation you're having on the way to the next class that might spark something. If you and I hadn't worked in an office together, think about all the opportunities we would have both missed. So we have to find that social space. And while online learning is fantastic, and I'm a great proponent of it, I also think we need to find ways for people to socially connect. And we need to make sure that students do have the opportunity to go to learning hubs or to meet each other and to connect face to face, eyeball each other, and have a conversation that's not just about the content or what they do for a job.
I'm so glad we had that conversation about going back to campus or going back to the office because it is a recurring theme. I've just refreshed all of my video content for this year and some of it I shared with you. And so I thought deeply about, where are we at? And most of my friends are having this discussion about, are you in the office 2, 3, 4 days a week? And some of the phrases I'm reading are really interesting. So, for example, you've got to earn the commute, whether it be going to campus or going to the office. Is it worth my while to do that? The campus or the office becomes a destination. You just mentioned 4 or 5 things that you don't get online. And people were complaining during lockdown that, we're not having those experiences. I think also, and it's relevant even though you teach master's students that are sort of into their career, and I'm sure lots of people on your campus are also pre-graduation, they learn by watching. I'm sure lots of people, when I've done my thing in the office, my graduates or my junior people have watched what I've done or what other people have done. They've learnt from that. Like you said, that conversation about the picture in your office, it's hard to have those things online. So I think part of that is whether you're in education, government or private enterprise, having that, as you say, social space is so important. And I think we're missing that, and people are debating, well, I don't want to go in the office because I like being at home. And I just ask you, I think the pendulum will probably shift for a while where we come back and have those experiences that earned the commute, and we might just have a balance of where we're remote or in person. What's best for you, in the room or online, or is it both?
It has to be both for me. And it has to be what's right for how the student learns. So not everybody is disciplined enough to learn online and do the other things. So I did a lot of my learning online and distance, and I am an extremely disciplined person. And so it worked for me. When you talk about earning the commute, I don't have to travel very far to go to the University of New South Wales. But I do have to say that one of the things I've always said about working there is that everybody smiles and says hello to each other as they pass each other. And I'm talking about people you don't know, whether it's the person, I don't know, cutting the lawn, or the person who's removing scaffolding, or even the students. And I often will be walking across campus and I'll hear, "Hey, Doc, Lynn," I stop. I'm so excited to see students that might have been learning online but are now back on campus. I love the fact that the coffee shop under my building, all of the team there, they know me, they know my coffee, they laugh about my little coffee cup that I take down. They're always welcoming, and it's just, we need that. We're social beings. So I like working from home. Don't get me wrong. I've got a great office and I've fantastic setup. And if I'm writing a paper where I don't want to have any interruptions, working from home can be great. But the ritual I have in terms of being at the office and being able to just stick my head out and have a different conversation, or be able to catch up with a colleague and get a different discipline perspective, or talk about something that's happening, that's really valuable. And it's that, don't sit 8 hours at your desk, just keep typing, because that doesn't produce good work. We know from many, many writing techniques, there's that sort of sweet spot somewhere between 20 and 40 minutes, and then you should have a break and do something else. And then we also know that some people can't concentrate for that long. So we need to work out for ourselves and have a very honest look at ourselves as to what works, what doesn't work. I find it interesting that you say earn the commute, and I understand that. But at the end of the day, for years, people have been commuting. And it just happened that during the pandemic, people went, well, why am I spending an hour of my life commuting? In actual fact, perhaps we should ask the different question is, what can I do with that hour? Can I read, listen to music, catch up with something, do a podcast? There are so many things that you can do with that hour. And if you see it as valuable time to use, then it's amazing. Last year, I've always been a person who drove to the office and drove to work. Last year, I had a few times where I caught the tram and caught the tram home. And I said to somebody, secretly, I need to tell you, I love catching the tram home. And somebody said, oh, you shouldn't say that too loud. I said, oh, well, I just walk out of my office and I'm on the tram. And then I get off the tram and it's 4 blocks home. And that walk along the tree-lined streets became a real connection with my neighbourhood, particularly as we moved into Christmas. There were people out having drinks or talking to each other because we had another spike in COVID. So people were meeting in the streets and talking. And they smiled and said hello, and I said hello. And I think we've got to be open to being back into those sort of situations.
2-part question. What's the most exciting use you've seen in any field? And what would you like it to be able to do in the future in a perfect world?
The most exciting thing is that I can see that what this is going to do is reduce inequalities for people who may have literacy problems. And that has to be a fantastic thing, because not every job in the world requires you to be a Rhodes Scholar in terms of writing. And so this is the most exciting thing. And what would I hope for the future? I would hope, and I'm a dreamer, Andrew, so I need to put that ahead of what I'm going to say, is I would hope that we can find a way that we can balance the use of generative AI so that it is used for good and ethically and with integrity, that we find a way of referencing it, that we find a way of saying ChatGPT or generative AI did this for me or powered by generative AI, and that we recognize and build a world that says this was done by the machine, and then we recognize the human for what they were able to do with it. But that's a dream, isn't it? But you asked me what's my greatest hope, so that's my greatest hope.
So as this is the Actionable Futurist podcast, what 3 things should our listeners do today when it comes to better understanding the power of generative AI?
To better understand, the first thing you need to do is go and play with it. But I want to give your listeners 3 things that they can do so that they need to stop worrying about this is going to take their job. The first one is make sure that you can make critical links between non-related things. Now, when I say critical links, actually critique those and understand what is superficial information over a deep dive of information. That, going back to the first point, you need to be familiar with new tech as it arrives and take advantage of it. It's fun to do manual maths, but you know what? I don't need to spend hours doing complex things. I have statistical packages to do my stats for me. I have other software to pull themes out of text, and I have a calculator. So guess what? Get the AI to do the mundane tasks and get really good at thinking about what you could take off your desk with it. And finally, what did you last innovate or do to innovate? If you can innovate, you will be employable for life. It is innovation. It is what we do with the tool that makes us stand out from the crowd. So worry less about the tool. It's a little bit like saying, oh, well, word processors take away the typist pool. Well, they did, but guess what? There are still people who do reception jobs and assistant jobs and all those sorts of things. So this is just another one of those tools. It's a watershed moment for education, for business, for the world. It is that important. You can't sit there and say, oh, somebody will work it out and tell me what it means. Dive on, get an account, have a play, and guess what? Then you're contributing to its general knowledge, which, well done, you've contributed in the world. But at least then you can have an informed discussion, or at least start an informed discussion with somebody who has looked at it. Don't get caught up in the hysteria of it. Make sure that you come back to what will it mean for me? And don't sit here saying, I'm protecting this of my job. Say, oh, if a machine could do this, would that be good? I can't tell you how excited I am to get those mundane tasks off my desk and be able to spend my time thinking, dreaming, creating, innovating for a world that's going to be so much better.
And my favourite part of the show, the quickfire round. A quick answer is a good answer. iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Window or aisle?
Window.
Online or in the room?
Both.
Your biggest hope for this year?
That I can make a difference to more of the students who have just come to get a qualification, that I actually open a window.
The app you use most on your phone?
Probably Mail.
The best advice you've ever received?
Be brave and take a risk, because Baz Luhrmann says life lived in fear is a life less lived. Take a risk. Back yourself is the best advice.
What are you reading at the moment?
2 books about action and focus. So focused action.
Who should I invite next onto the podcast?
Somebody who thinks that tech is frightening.
And final quickfire question, how do you want to be remembered?
For somebody who brought joy and hope, changed how people thought.
Lynn, a great discussion as always. You're the only person who've been on the podcast 3 times, so you've got the record so far. How can people find out more about you and your work?
They can follow me on Twitter at Lynn Gribble. Of course, they can reach out to me through LinkedIn. And of course, my profile is up at the University of New South Wales under Lynn Gribble as well. And I'm always happy to receive an email. They should just say, though, that it's because they've heard me through you, and at least I've got a context to start a conversation.
Lynn, thank you so much for your time. As always, something to noodle on. You always make me think, and it's great to still be in touch.
Thanks for that, Andrew.
Thank you for listening to the Actionable Futurist podcast. You can find all of our previous shows at actionablefuturist.com. And if you like what you've heard on the show, please consider subscribing via your favourite podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can find out more about Andrew and how he helps corporates navigate a disruptive digital world with keynote speeches and C-suite workshops delivered in person or virtually at actionablefuturist.com. Until next time, this has been the Actionable Futurist Podcast.